It was snowing on the day I aged out of the foster care system, but not the kind of pretty snow you see on postcards. This was the wet gray kind that turned to slush the second it hit the cracked pavement outside St. Ursula's group home in Cleveland. My breath came out in harsh clouds as I stood there with 2 duffel bags, a backpack, and a feeling I couldn't quite name. Not excitement, not sadness, something hollow. Cold wind cut through my coat like it wasn't even there. A bus rumbled past on the street, splashing icy water across my sneakers. A fitting send-off, I thought. 14 years in the system, and I was leaving with all the ceremony of trash day. Mrs. Doyle, my last caseworker, held a manila envelope out to me like it was something fragile. The look on her face made me uneasy. I didn't like being looked at that way. Soft eyes pity the kind people use when they don't know how to help. "This came for you 2 days ago," she said, her voice cautious. "I was told to deliver it today. On your birthday." I frowned. "Who's it from?" She hesitated. "A law office in Vermont." Vermont. Might as well have said the moon. I didn't move to take it, so she gently pressed it into my hand. There was something heavy inside. Not heavy like money, heavy like truth. "You all right?" she asked, like she had asked 100 times before. I gave the same answer I always did. Yeah. But I wasn't. Something about that envelope unsettled me in a way nothing else had. Not the foster homes, or the moves, or the kids who came and went, or the nights I lay awake wondering why nobody ever chose me. I opened it right there in the cold. Inside was a single cream-colored letter embossed with dark green ink, Wallace & Shore Attorneys, at Law, Maple Hollow, Vermont. My eyes caught on the words, estate, inheritance, grandmother Eleanor Whitmore. And then I stopped breathing. My grandmother. The woman who knew I went into the foster system. The woman who chose not to take me. She was dead. And for some unexplainable reason, she had left me something. I heard myself think the words before I felt them. She didn't want me then, why the hell would she want me now? The wind picked up. My fingers stung. Blood roared in my ears. For a moment the world felt blurred, like memory and reality had collided. "Caleb," Mrs. Doyle said softly. "You okay, honey?" I didn't answer. I folded the letter, stuffed it into my backpack, and walked away without saying goodbye. I'd done enough goodbyes in my life. I didn't need another. I barely remember the bus ride to downtown Cleveland, or how I ended up at the Greyhound terminal with a one-way ticket to Vermont clutched in my hand. I just knew I couldn't stay. Not in Cleveland, not in Ohio. Maybe not even in this version of myself. The bus station was loud human noise mixed with intercom announcements, steam, and engine rumble. But somehow I felt more alone there than I ever had in a foster home. I sat with my knees pulled up to my chest, the envelope still burning a hole in my bag. I didn't open it again, but it stayed in my mind whispering unanswered questions. Who was she really? Why now? Why me? At some point, I opened Google Maps on my cracked phone. I typed Maple Hollow, Vermont. A tiny dot appeared on the screen, surrounded by forests, fields, and blank white spaces. No airports, no highways, barely a town at all. It looked like a place people went to disappear. A few hours later, I was on a southbound bus that would eventually take me north. That didn't make sense to me either. But neither did a grandmother who ignored me my whole life and then left me an inheritance, which according to the letter included a farmhouse, 60 acres of land, a barn. That word felt unfamiliar on my tongue, like a word from another language, another life. At some point, I fell asleep. I dreamed of wood and snow, and a woman I couldn't picture sitting at a work table carving something I couldn't see. When I woke, we were in Pennsylvania. Snow draped across the rolling hills like white flannel. The world looked softer there, kinder. I felt none of it. I pulled out the envelope again, finally reading it properly. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I regret to inform you that your maternal grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, passed away on November 8th of this year. In accordance with her last will and testament, you are the sole heir to her property and financial estate. You are requested to appear at my office in Maple Hollow, Vermont, to receive further instructions, personal effects, and keys. Mrs. Whitmore requested that I deliver a personal letter to you in person. She asked me to tell you one thing before you came. Tell him I didn't forget him. Signed, Gregory Wallace, Attorney at Law. My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to be angry, or sad, or relieved, or something in between. Forgotten. That was the word I'd always used for myself. Maybe that word wasn't mine alone. Maybe it belonged to her, too. 3 buses, 2 terminals, 1 sleepless night. The last bus was almost empty. Just 2 older women talking quietly, a soldier sleeping with headphones and me staring through frosted glass as Vermont unfolded outside. It was different, quieter. Pine forests thick and dark. Snow falling soft, now not harsh. Houses too far apart to be neighbors. When I finally stepped off at Maple Hollow's only bus stop, I felt something I hadn't expected. A shift. A feeling like the past had finally caught up with me. A faded farm address was scrawled on a yellowed envelope in my backpack. Ray Bennett would pick me up, the lawyer had said. I didn't know who Ray was. But when a green pickup truck pulled up and a bearded man rolled down the window and yelled, "You, Caleb," I nodded. He didn't smile, but his voice was warm. "Come on, son. Roads get worse after dark." Son. No one had called me that in years. I put my bags in the truck bed and climbed in. The leather seats were worn but warm. It smelled faintly of sawdust and peppermint. "Got a long ride up to the Whitmore place," he said. I stared out the window. The Whitmore place. My place now, apparently. I wasn't sure what that meant, or what waited for me there. But I knew this much. Whatever I found at that farmhouse, it would not be the end of my story. It would be the beginning. The ride up to the Whitmore property took almost an hour winding through narrow country roads that felt more like suggestions than actual infrastructure. Snow whispered across the windshield, soft and steady, muffling the sound of the engine and deepening the silence between me and the man driving the truck. Ray Bennett was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. Strong shoulders, thick hands. The kind of face that had spent more time squinting at sunlight than screens. He didn't talk much, but every now and then he'd point to something through the frosted window. "That's the old mill, or there used to be a schoolhouse down there," like he was trying to hand me pieces of a puzzle I hadn't asked for. "You ever been out this way?" he finally asked as we climbed a hill thick with pine trees. I shook my head. First time in Vermont. Ray nodded like that made perfect sense. Beautiful place. Quiet. Not much going on unless you know where to look. He said it like it meant something. I wasn't sure what. We drove in silence for a few more miles until the trees broke open to reveal a clearing, and there it was. The Whitmore farmhouse. White clapboard siding, green shutters, wraparound porch sagging slightly on one corner. The place looked like it had been pulled straight out of a history book, only dustier. A red barn stood behind it, bigger than I expected, its roof bowed like a man who'd carried too much weight for too long. Beyond that, open fields stretched toward a tree line, the snow making everything look clean, untouched. Ray parked and cut the engine. She kept it up best she could, he said quietly, even when her hands started giving out. Wouldn't let me or Nancy do more than the basics. I didn't move to get out. I just stared at the house. My house now, apparently. She lived here alone, I asked. 43 years, Ray said. After her husband died, she made it clear this place was her home and her responsibility. Never complained. Just kept building. Building. The word echoed in my chest. Come on, he said, opening his door. Let me get you inside before the pipes freeze. The air inside the farmhouse was colder than I expected, but dry. Clean. It smelled like cedar and old books with something faintly floral underneath lavender, maybe. The furniture was old, but solid. Wood heavy. No clutter, no mess, no photos on the walls. Everything felt intentional. She was a minimalist, Ray said, catching me looking around. Didn't like knickknacks. Said if it didn't serve a purpose, it didn't belong. He moved into the kitchen, checked the stove, then turned a dial on the wall. The heat kicked in with a groan. I turned the water on this morning. Tank's full. Fridge is stocked thanks to my wife. You'll be all right here for a few nights while you get settled. I dropped my bags in the front hallway, suddenly unsure if I should take my shoes off. The floor creaked beneath me like it had a memory of every step ever taken across it. Ray reappeared with a manila envelope. Lawyer gave me this for you. Said to make sure you read it before anything else. I took it with numb fingers. Inside was another letter, handwritten this time. I recognized the scrawl from the envelope back in Cleveland. Caleb, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I could have given you this letter face to face, but I ran out of time. Maybe you're angry with me. I wouldn't blame you. I failed you once. But I've tried to do right by you now, the only way I know how. This house, this land, this life, it's all yours if you want it. I've left instructions, resources, and something else. Something I couldn't explain in words alone. It's in the barn, in the back room. You'll know it when you see it. I built things, Caleb. I made furniture, but also something more than that. I built a life out of mistakes and sawdust. I hope you'll walk into that barn and find your own reason to stay. You don't owe me anything. But maybe, just maybe, I left you something worth keeping. Eleanor Whitmore. My throat tightened. I read the letter again. Then again. She hadn't signed it. Grandma hadn't written Love, Eleanor. Just a name. But the weight in those lines was heavy. Real. Like a woman who'd spent years building courage one board at a time and finally hammered out the last nail. Ray was watching me from the hallway, quiet. You okay? He asked. I nodded slowly, then whispered more to myself than to him. She planned this, down to the day I'd walk out of that damn home. The next morning I stood on the porch with a cup of burnt coffee and looked out at the barn. Snow coated the roof like frosting. The sliding doors were closed, but one of them leaned just a little, like someone had opened it recently, then changed their mind. Ray had left early, promising to return later with firewood. I hadn't unpacked. I didn't even know where to start. But I knew where I was going. The barn. I pulled on the heavy coat I found in the front closet, probably Eleanor's, and walked through the snow. The barn creaked as I approached, groaning like it had been waiting for me. I grabbed the handle. It stuck. I pulled harder. The door slid open with a scream of metal on metal. Cold air rushed out. Or maybe it rushed in. Inside the barn was dark, but I could see the outlines of shapes, tables, benches, covered objects. Dust hung in the air like mist. There was something sacred about the silence. I took one step inside, then another. The boards didn't just creak, they sighed. I spotted a light switch and flipped it. Nothing. Of course not. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and moved deeper in. Then I saw it. A small wooden sign hanging from a beam in the back, barely visible through cobwebs and dust. Workshop. The air changed. Heavier, thicker, like I was walking into someone's memory. And maybe I was. Back in the house that night, I found another envelope on the kitchen table. It hadn't been there before. Written in faded ink, all caps. Read this after you see the barn. I didn't sleep that night. My dreams were filled with sawdust and shadows, and a woman's voice I had never heard calling me home. The barn was bigger than it looked from the outside. Somehow colder, too. My boots echoed as I stepped across the worn floorboard's flashlight beam, trembling against rows of workbenches, pegboards with neatly arranged tools and tarps covering hulking shapes that I couldn't yet name. It wasn't just a barn. It was a cathedral made of wood and memory, and every inch of it felt like it was watching me. I shivered not from the cold, but from something older than that. This place doesn't feel inherited. It feels haunted, I muttered. Not haunted like ghosts, but like history. Like stories pressed into the walls that didn't want to be forgotten. I moved toward the back room marked workshop, pushed the door open with my shoulder. Hinges creaked a long metallic groan, and the smell of sawdust rushed out like breath. Inside was order. A kind of sacred precision I'd never known. Every chisel clamp and carving knife had its place. The air was still but heavy with purpose. One whole wall was covered in wooden shelves stacked with labeled jars and folded pieces of cloth. In the corner stood a high-backed wooden chair, with curves so perfect it looked grown rather than built. I reached out and ran my fingers along the edge of a table. Smooth. Solid. No splinters. It had been finished by someone who knew how to make wood feel like silk. On a small table in the center of the room was a wooden box. A tag dangled from a string, Caleb. No last name. No message. Just that. My hand hesitated, then opened it. Inside were 4 things: a black USB drive, a leather-bound journal with the initials EW pressed into the cover, a small brass key, and a folded note that said, "Begin here." Back at the house, I pulled a stool to the kitchen counter, plugged the USB into the old laptop Gregory Wallace had given me when I left his office, and clicked the only file on it, intro.move. The video began with static, then resolved into an image of an older woman sitting in front of a workbench, Eleanor. Her gray hair was pulled into a low bun, and she wore a canvas apron speckled with sawdust. Her eyes, my eyes, met the camera. "If you're watching this," she said, "then you opened the barn, which means you didn't run." Her voice was low and rough, but steady. "I know I don't deserve a second chance with you. I know I forfeited the first, but I hope you'll let me show you something I never got to share." She reached off camera and picked up a small piece of wood, running her fingers across it like it was alive. "I built things to survive. After your grandfather died, after your mother left, after I let you go. This was how I stayed human, making something useful out of something broken." She paused. "You don't have to stay, Caleb. But if you do, there's a craft here that's yours by blood and by right. You come from a long line of builders. I just hope I left enough behind for you to find your way." The screen went black. That was it. No directions. No tears. No promises. just an invitation. I opened the journal next. The first page read, Furniture Making for Whitmores Who Don't Know Yet. Volume 1, Tools, Safety Cuts, and Grain. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I flipped the page. Everything was neatly written in block print. Diagrams, instructions, personal notes in the margins. It was a textbook, written for me. She'd built this every screw and sentence for someone she wasn't sure would ever read it. I didn't sleep that night. I read 50 pages by the dim light of the kitchen, and in the morning I knew exactly what I needed to do. I found the brass keys lock in a small office tucked in the far corner of the barn behind another door that groaned like a warning. Inside was a desk, a filing cabinet, and several wooden crates. Dust covered everything. The key opened the bottom drawer. Inside were more journals labeled by year. Tax receipts, inventory sheets, names I didn't recognize, and a blueprint of the barn that showed hidden storage compartments and wiring diagrams. One crate was filled with labeled video drives, cutting techniques, joinery, finishing, restoration. Eleanor hadn't just left me a property, she left me a curriculum, a life. That afternoon, I heard a knock on the front door. I opened it to find a woman in a green jacket holding a pie. "Hi." "Claire Hartley," she said, offering a warm but cautious smile. "I run the organic farm down the road. Ray said you might need some real food and a non-ghost to talk to." I blinked. "Did he also mention I'm not great at conversation?" She shrugged. "Neither is broccoli, but I still grow it." Against all logic, I laughed. She stepped inside, looking around. "Haven't changed much," she said, running a hand along the banister. "Your grandmother was a bit of a fortress. Didn't let many people in." "Yeah, I'm getting that." Claire's eyes met mine. "But she talked about you. A lot more than you'd think." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She placed the pie on the counter. "I'll let you get back to brooding, but if you ever want help figuring out which of the 20 identical tools in that barn is a plane, I've got some experience. Not much, but enough not to lose a thumb." I watched her walk back down the path, her boots crunching in the snow. Maybe Vermont wasn't as empty as I'd thought. That night I started my first project, cleaning the shop. Eleanor's notes said nothing about what to build first, but the first video was labeled Respect the Space. So I swept, wiped down tools, sorted screws, refolded cloths. The barn was quiet except for the creaks and hums that came with old buildings and old ghosts. But it didn't feel quite as haunted anymore. Not now that I knew she'd been waiting. I went to bed with sore arms, wood dust in my hair, and a journal full of flagged pages beside me. I still didn't know what I was doing here, but I wasn't planning on leaving tomorrow. The next morning I stood in the center of the workshop and opened a new journal labeled Beginner's First Build. The first page had a sketch of a bench. Nothing fancy. Simple joints. Sanded edges. Below it, one line in Eleanor's handwriting. "Don't build it perfect. Build it honest." I looked around the barn, looked at the tools, and I whispered to no one, "Let's see what I've got." The wood was harder than it looked. I'd spent the morning studying Eleanor's sketches, flipping through her first build journal, and measuring the same damn board 5 times before daring to cut. Now, hours later, I had 4 mismatched pieces, a raw blister on my palm, and a pile of cherrywood shavings that looked like I'd fought a squirrel to death. The bench I was trying to build wasn't fancy. It was meant to be simple, 4 legs, 2 stretchers, a flat top. According to Eleanor's notes, simple teaches more than complicated ever could. But simple didn't account for the way my hands shook when I held a chisel, or how the saw kept binding because I didn't yet understand the grain. My phone buzzed on the workbench. Claire. You alive in there, or buried under wood? I smirked and typed back, somewhere between mangled and mildly proud. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a carrot. I didn't even ask. I wiped sweat from my neck and stared at the bench in progress. 3 legs were mostly in. The 4th refused to sit right. Either the tenon was too thick, or the mortise was too shallow, or I was too dumb to know the difference. I picked up the leg again, turned it over in my hand. The grain ran diagonally. Was that good? I flipped through Eleanor's journal, trying to find the note about orientation. And there it was beneath a sketch of the same joint I was botching. Wood is stubborn. Be more stubborn. I let out a low laugh. Okay, Eleanor. Round 2. I chiseled, sanded, and prayed. The leg fit this time. Not perfect, but snug. Secure. When I hammered it into place, a low, solid thunk echoed through the barn. It felt like something more than progress. It felt like she was listening. By nightfall, the bench was standing. Crooked. One leg shorter than the rest. But standing. And so was I. The next morning, I found Ray unloading firewood at the porch. You sleeping out there in that barn yet? He asked, stacking logs into the rack. Not unless sawdust makes for a good mattress, I said. He gave me a look. You'll get used to it. That place gets under your skin. I didn't disagree. He motioned to the house. Nancy made soup. Said if you don't come by tonight, she's walking it up here and pouring it down your throat. I smiled. Tell her I'll be there. Before he left, Ray paused. You know your grandmother worked that barn every single day, even when her hands started locking up. Wouldn't let arthritis slow her down. Why, I asked. Why push herself so hard? He shrugged. Because regret doesn't go away on its own. You gotta work it out of your system. One board at a time. That evening at their house, Nancy greeted me like I'd just returned from war. There was soup biscuits, a roaring fire, and a photo of Eleanor on the mantel I hadn't seen before, her younger, maybe mid-30s, standing in front of the barn, with a hammer slung over one shoulder and sawdust in her hair. She looked unbothered, capable, proud. She didn't just build furniture, Nancy said, when she caught me staring at the photo. She built an apology. I turned to her. For what I asked, though, I already knew. Nancy stirred her tea slowly. For shutting your mom out. For saying no when she should have said yes. For being afraid of love after losing too much of it. She told you that she didn't have to. Some people carve their guilt into wood instead of words. That hit deeper than I wanted to admit. She left me videos, I said. Journals, instructions. Nancy nodded. She was hoping you'd come looking for answers. And she wanted to make sure you didn't leave empty-handed, even if all you got from her is a skill. I looked down at my hands, blistered raw, but steady. She thought I'd stay. Nancy smiled gently. She hoped. She never believed she deserved it. After dinner, I walked home under a sky so clear it felt like glass. Stars burned above the treetops. The snow crunched under my boots in slow, rhythmic pulses. The air was sharp, but clean, like the land had been scrubbed by silence. I stopped in front of the barn. Its outline in the moonlight was softer than by day. The way the snow curved along the roof, the way the wood reflected just enough glow, it didn't look like a workspace anymore. It looked like a place someone had loved. I walked inside. The bench stood exactly where I'd left it. Lopsided, sturdy. I ran my hand along the edge again. I could feel every uneven plane, every scratch, every imperfection. And I was proud, not because it was good, but because it was mine. The next morning, I found another USB drive in the crate Eleanor had left, labeled "Finishing Touches Making It Last." The video opened with Eleanor holding a half-finished table leg. "Most people think the last step is sanding and stain," she said. "But they're wrong. The last step is care." She looked into the camera. Care means you notice the details. You take your time. You fix what others won't see. Not because someone's watching, but because it matters. She paused. "And because you can't make something last if you rush past what's broken." Later that day, I was standing outside the barn when I heard an engine I didn't recognize. A dusty red pickup pulled up the driveway, grumbling like it didn't want to be anywhere. The man behind the wheel stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and a jacket that had seen better decades. He nodded at me. "You, Caleb, yeah. I'm Logan. Used to help your grandma with repairs." He didn't offer a handshake, just walked past me and toward the barn. "Ray said you might need some help with the tools. Figured I'd take a look before you break something expensive." Charming. I followed him inside. He whistled low. She kept it just the way she liked it. "Damn." "You knew her well," Logan didn't answer. He walked straight to the workbench, ran his fingers along the top. "She had hands like mine," he said finally, "but heart like yours." I wasn't sure what that meant. "You building yet?" he asked, glancing at the bench. "A little." He inspected it. Didn't laugh. Didn't praise. He just nodded once. Better than I expected. He looked me dead in the eyes. "Don't stop." Then he left. That night I sat beside the fireplace in the farmhouse, the journal open on my lap. Page 92 had a note I hadn't noticed before. "It won't feel like forgiveness. Not at first. It'll feel like splinters. But keep going." I stared at that line until the fire burned low. Outside, the snow was falling again. But inside, I was starting to thaw. The red box sat like a dare on the workbench. I'd walked past it for days, pretending I didn't care what was inside, convincing myself that I had enough already: tools, journals, videos, memories I never asked for. But now, after building that crooked bench, after Nancy's words about Eleanor carving apologies into wood after Logan's visit, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I ran my fingers over the smooth lid. The top was engraved with a simple W carved deep and worn at the corners. No lock, no latch, just that brass hinge and the kind of silence that only meant something important was buried inside. I opened it. Inside were old letters, dozens of them. Some neatly folded, others crumpled at the edges, like they'd been read too many times, or not at all. There were dates written in careful handwriting: 1999, 2001, 2007. Most were addressed to my mother. My hands went cold. The first envelope I picked up had been opened but never sent. "Lena, I was wrong." I didn't read further right away. I just stared at the name. Lena Whitmore. My mom. The woman who left Vermont, who died in a car crash I barely remember, whose voice I hadn't heard since I was 7. I'd never seen a letter addressed to her before, much less one that started with that sentence. I took a breath and kept reading. "I was wrong about your choices. Wrong to try and control you. Wrong to let you go. And wrong to let my pride stop me from calling you back. If you're reading this, maybe I finally found the courage to mail it. Or maybe it's just another thing I keep locked in a drawer, pretending time will do what I won't. You were right to leave, but I miss you every day. I still remember how you used to draw with charcoal on the side of the barn. You were 12. I didn't tell you then, but I kept one of those boards. There's sawdust in every breath I take these days, and maybe that's a punishment, or maybe it's my prayer. I don't know anymore. I just know I'd give anything to see you walk through the door again. Mom, I swallowed hard. My chest tightened in that old familiar way, like grief had grown roots under my ribs. I kept going. There were letters to me, too. Most started with "My dearest Caleb," written in the same shaky handwriting I'd seen on the first letter Gregory Wallace gave me. You were 7 the last time I saw you. You were wearing a blue jacket with one button missing and holding a stuffed fox like it was your best friend. Maybe it was. I still dream about that day sometimes, the way you looked at me confused and quiet, like you didn't understand why I wasn't taking you home. I didn't take you because I was afraid, and I convinced myself that fear was love. You deserved someone strong. I wasn't that woman then. Maybe I'm still not. But I've tried to leave you something stronger than me, a craft, a legacy, a place. I know that doesn't erase the years, but I hope it softens them. I stopped reading and let my head fall into my hands. How do you grieve someone you hated? How do you forgive someone you barely knew? I didn't have answers. But I had a pile of letters that made everything more complicated and somehow more clear. The truth didn't fix anything, but it stopped the guessing. The next morning, I walked into town with a mission. Claire had mentioned a used bookstore a few days back. Maple Hollow Books. I hadn't thought much about it then, but now I needed to know more about my mother. Not just what she did, who she was, what people remembered. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. It smelled like old paper and cinnamon. Behind the counter sat a woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back into a braid. She wore thick glasses and had a stack of paperbacks beside her, half of them dog-eared and falling apart. "You must be the Whitmore boy," she said without looking up. "Is it that obvious? You've got Eleanor's eyes, and her tendency to hover." I didn't realize I was standing in the doorway like a scared kid. She looked up, then smiled softly. "Name's Marjorie Thompson. Most folks call me Marge. I was your mother's art teacher when she was a kid." Something sharp and unexpected pierced my chest. "You knew my mom, knew her well. She was a firecracker, drawn to beauty, restless, smart, stubborn as the day is long." Sound familiar? I let out a short breath. "You have anything of hers?" "Anything she made." Marge tilted her head. "You ever seen the mural on the side of the old post office?" I shook my head. "She painted that when she was 17. Full color, 10 feet high. Sunflowers and sky. Got commissioned by the town council. Your grandmother never went to see it." That didn't surprise me. She used to sit right where you are now. Marge continued sketching on napkins, hands covered in ink. Said drawing made her feel like she was making sense of the noise in her head. I looked down at my own hands, blistered, stained with wood glue and varnish. "She left when she was 19, I said. "Married my dad, died young." Marge nodded. "But she lived while she was here. Don't let anyone tell you different." Before I left, she handed me a framed sketch from behind the counter. Charcoal. A crooked old maple tree behind a barn. "Found it after your mom passed," she said. "Never had the heart to sell it." I stared at the signature in the corner, Lena W. "Thank you," I whispered. Marge's eyes softened. She loved this town even when it didn't love her back. Kinda like your grandmother. That night, I hung the sketch in the farmhouse living room, right above the mantel. It was strange how a piece of paper could anchor you more than the floor under your feet. I sat on the couch for a long time staring at it, thinking about the way my mom must have seen the world. The angles, the shadows, the trees she must have walked past 100 times, and how she chose to remember them in art. Maybe creation was our family language. Eleanor carved, Lena sketched, and now I was trying to do both. The next morning, Claire showed up with a crate of potatoes and a smile. "You look like someone who had a dream and a meltdown in the same night," she said. "Close enough." She noticed the drawing on the wall. "That hers, yeah." Claire stepped closer, studying the lines. You can tell she loved what she saw, even if she didn't say it out loud. She left a lot unsaid. Claire looked at me. "So say it now." I didn't know what that meant yet, but I was starting to feel like maybe I could figure it out. That afternoon, I went back into the barn and opened Eleanor's third journal. This one was labeled Advanced Joinery, 1998 to 2003. But the first page didn't have diagrams. It had a single sentence. "Grief is a project you never finish, but you keep sanding anyway." I picked up my tools and kept sanding. The piece of walnut wood was beautiful, too beautiful, honestly. Tight grain, deep, rich color, a silky surface that almost didn't need sanding. It had probably been one of Eleanor's better finds. She must have set it aside for something important. And now here I was, sweating through my shirt, second-guessing every mark I made on it. I wasn't even halfway through the cut, and the saw blade was already drifting. I stopped and stared at the crooked line in the wood, my heart starting to race. One wrong cut, and I'm back to being the kid no one wanted. The thought hit me out of nowhere like a kick to the ribs. But there it was. Raw, honest, familiar. It wasn't about the wood, it was about being seen, about screwing something up and proving again that I didn't belong. I dropped the saw, stepped back, and cursed under my breath. The barn was quiet, except for the sound of wind pushing against the walls, making the rafters creak. I sat down on a stool and stared at the half-finished project on the bench, a small table based on one of Eleanor's simpler mid-level designs. Except it didn't feel simple anymore. I ran a hand through my hair, now sticky with sawdust and sweat. My palms were blistered. My back ached. I'd already ruined one board yesterday and didn't have enough to waste another. I grabbed the notebook I'd been using, flipped to a diagram of the table's mortise and tenon joints, and read Eleanor's notes for the 5th time. Her handwriting was firm, precise. "Measure twice, cut once. If it still goes wrong, don't waste the mistake, study it." I muttered, "Easy for you to say." I could almost hear her scoff in response. "You talking to the furniture again?" Claire's voice floated in from the doorway. I looked up, startled. She was carrying a basket of fresh eggs and a thermos. "You weren't answering texts." "Thought I'd do a welfare check." "I was busy ruining things," I said, nodding toward the table. She walked in, set the basket down, and studied the project. "It doesn't look ruined. That's because I stopped before I could screw it up completely." Claire tilted her head. "You ever think maybe you're allowed to mess up?" I leaned back on the stool. "Not when the wood's this expensive. Not when people expect you to live up to a name." She was quiet for a moment. "Then you know what I see?" I raised an eyebrow. "I see a guy who's working with his hands, not running from his past. A guy who's making something even if it isn't perfect yet." I let her words sit. Claire poured some coffee from the thermos and handed me a mug. "You've got this idea in your head that one bad cut means you're worthless. You ever think maybe it just means you're still learning?" I stared into the coffee. "I don't know how to not be afraid of screwing up." "Then do it scared," she said. She left me with the coffee and the quiet. After she was gone, I picked up the saw again. Slower this time. I didn't rush. I followed the grain. I let the wood tell me where it wanted to be shaped. The cut came out clean, almost perfect. That evening, Logan stopped by unannounced as usual. He looked at the table frame, nodded once. "You're getting the hang of it. Still got a long way to go." Logan smirked. "So does everyone. Even your grandmother. She spent a year making the same damn stool over and over until it stopped wobbling. She tell you that? She made me sit on them." He paused, then pointed to the table leg I'd just finished. "You hand-planed this, yeah. You're pushing too hard," he said, and demonstrated the right grip, the right pace. His hands were calloused but precise. I watched carefully. "How long did it take you to learn all this?" I asked. "Still learning," he said. He helped me adjust the clamps, level the frame. No small talk, just the work. Before he left, he said, "She'd be proud, you know. Of the table, no. Of the fact that you stuck around long enough to build one." Then he was gone. That weekend, Claire invited me to her farm, said she needed help moving some equipment and promised dinner as payment. Her place was small, efficient, and thriving rows of vegetables under plastic tunnels, a restored barn turned greenhouse, and chickens that acted like they owned the place. I helped her fix a busted fence post. We worked mostly in silence, but it wasn't awkward. Afterward, we sat on her porch eating lentil stew and bread she'd made herself. "You know," she said between bites, "you're not the only one trying to build something from scratch." I looked at her. "What do you mean, this place was my grandfather's? He ran it into the ground in the 80s. When I came back after college, it was all rot and weeds. People laughed when I said I was staying. And now," she gestured at the fields, "now they come here to buy what I grow." She turned to me. "You've got that same energy. People think you're just a story, but you're rebuilding something real." Her words stayed with me. Back at the Whitmore barn, I finished the table a week later. The last coat of finish went on smooth and even. The walnut glowed under the shop light, dark and warm like poured syrup. I ran my hand across the top, feeling the grain, the curves, the parts that weren't perfect. It didn't wobble. It stood steady. I stood back, staring at it for a long time. Not bad for someone who'd nearly walked away from it all 6 weeks ago. I called Ray and Nancy. Claire came too. Logan even showed up with a 6-pack of root beer. We sat around the table in the barn and shared a meal Nancy had cooked: beef stew, cornbread, apple crisp. No one said it, but I think we all knew what the moment meant. This wasn't just about the table. It was about choosing to stay, about building something from nothing, about starting to believe that maybe I wasn't just passing through. Later that night, I found a note in Eleanor's old recipe book tucked between pages stained with cinnamon and flour. "Teach someone someday. Not just how to build, but how to belong." I read it twice. Then I picked up a fresh journal and wrote on the first page, "Project Teach." The fire started with a pop. Not the kind of pop that means trouble right away. Just a soft, dry crack, wood shifting under heat, or a nail expanding. I was sanding down a tabletop at the far end of the barn, wearing headphones, lost in the rhythm. The smell of cedar and finish hung thick in the air. Then I saw the smoke, thin, almost invisible, curling up from the corner near the electrical panel. I ripped off the headphones and ran. By the time I got there, flames were licking up the plywood wall, dancing fast and hot. My brain froze for one terrifying second. Then instinct kicked in. I grabbed the extinguisher mounted by the office door, yanked the pin, and aimed at the base of the fire like the instructions said. Nothing. I squeezed again. Still nothing. Empty. Damn it, the fire was spreading now, creeping along the sawdust that had collected in the corners. I sprinted outside, scooped a metal bucket full of snow, and threw it on the flames. It hissed, but didn't die. The panic rose fast. My heart pounded, fists clenching, mind racing. What if I burned it all down? What if I destroyed her legacy before I even built mine? Then headlights cut through the snowy dusk. A truck skidded to a stop. Logan jumped out before it had even parked, hauling a second extinguisher from the cab. Without a word, he stomped through the barn door and blasted the fire with a roar of white foam. In seconds, the flames hissed and choked and went dark. Silence returned, thick and sharp. We stood there in the smoky air, breathing hard. The scorched wood smoldered, sending up little wisps like ghosts retreating. Logan turned to me, his face unreadable. "You all right? I think so." He nodded once. "Then we talk after cleanup." Together we opened every window and door, letting in the bitter Vermont air. The barn groaned in protest. I mopped up water-shoveled ash swept until my arms ached. When we were done, Logan sat on the edge of the workbench and looked me dead in the eyes. "You ever check your gear? I thought it was good." He didn't yell. That somehow made it worse. That's the kind of thinking that burns down more than buildings. I dropped onto a stool, burying my head in my hands. I almost lost everything, I muttered. Logan exhaled through his nose. Some fires burn to destroy. Others burn to reveal. I looked up at him. What did this one reveal? You're not ready, but you're willing. That counts for something. He leaned forward. You've got talent, Caleb, and heart. But this shop isn't just old tools and nice wood. It's dangerous. It's alive. You treat it like a garage, it'll bite you. I nodded slowly. I get it now. Good. Because next time I might not be down the road. He stood, brushed sawdust off his jeans. I'll help you upgrade the panel, and we're doing a full safety check. Non-negotiable. I didn't argue. That night I barely slept. I sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a blanket, replaying the moment the extinguisher failed. What if I hadn't been here? What if Logan hadn't shown up? The barn wasn't just a workshop. It was Eleanor's voice, her love, her apology. And it was mine now, my responsibility, my burden, my blessing. The fire hadn't destroyed it, but it had made something clear. I was holding something sacred, and I had to learn how to carry it. The next morning, Logan returned with a tool belt and a black coffee. We worked in silence, replacing wiring, cleaning vents, installing new smoke detectors. He showed me how to check breakers, how to ground a line, how to properly store flammable finishes. Every lesson came with a story. About a friend who lost a shop, a nephew who got burned, his own accident that left scars under his sleeve. By lunch, the barn felt cleaner, safer, smarter. Logan handed me a fresh fire extinguisher and said, "Check it every month, and don't hang it where the heat hits first." I nodded. He didn't stay long after that. Just grunted good work and drove off. But something between us had shifted. Respect, maybe, or understanding. Claire showed up that afternoon with sandwiches and a fireproof cabinet. Ray told me she said, setting it down. "Glad you're okay." Oh. I shrugged. Still processing. She studied my face. "Want to talk about it?" I hesitated. Then said, "It wasn't just a fire. It felt like a warning." From who I looked around the barn. Eleanor. The universe, myself. Claire leaned against the wall. "You're allowed to screw up, Caleb. just not the same way twice. I laughed. That sounds like something she would have said. She said a lot of things, Claire replied. Most of them I didn't understand until later. I showed her the scorch marks, the replaced wiring, the upgraded safety stations. She nodded in approval. This place might have gotten singed, but it didn't burn. I met her eyes. Neither did I. That evening, I finally opened the folder marked Business Records, something I'd been avoiding since the first week. Inside were client lists, invoices, gallery contracts, even hand-sketched floor plans for custom pieces. She had commissions booked up until the year she died. I spent hours reading through the names, notes scribbled in margins. Repeat buyer. Loves walnut. This one's picky. Triple-check the angles. Good man. Lost his wife. Build with care. The human part of her business was everywhere. She hadn't just sold furniture. She'd built relationships. That night, I responded to my first client email, someone who had reached out weeks ago to ask about unfinished Eleanor Whitmore originals. I typed carefully. Hi, my name is Caleb Whitmore. I'm Eleanor's grandson, and I've recently inherited her workshop. While I'm still learning the craft, I'd be happy to speak with you about her remaining pieces or future commissions if you're open to something new. Thanks for your patience. Caleb, I hit send. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from purpose. The next morning, a reply was waiting. Caleb, I've been hoping someone would pick up where she left off. I'd love to schedule a visit to the farm and see the space. She spoke of you, often said you had her stubborn streak. Let me know when. Harrison Wells, Boston. My breath caught. I remembered the name from her ledger. One of her longest clients. Collector, critic, influencer in the high-end furniture world. He wanted to come here, to see my work, to judge it, to maybe believe in it. I looked around the barn, the fresh wiring, the swept floors, the new extinguishers. Then I glanced at the bench I'd built weeks ago, crooked but proud. Maybe I wasn't ready for all of it. But I was ready for something. The morning Harrison Wells was scheduled to arrive, I woke up 3 hours before sunrise. I didn't even try to sleep longer. My mind was already awake, racing, grinding, preparing. I shaved for the first time in a week. Wore the one flannel shirt that didn't smell like smoke or varnish. Cleaned the barn again, even though it was already spotless. Polished every visible surface. Lined up the tools like soldiers waiting for inspection. When the sun finally rose, it hit the fresh finish on the table I'd built like a spotlight. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. This wasn't just about showing my work. It was about proving I belonged in this place. Because deep down, a voice still whispered, if I can build something this solid, maybe I can build a life. Claire showed up an hour before Harrison, holding a to-go coffee tray and a nervous smile. You look like you're preparing for a royal visit, she said, handing me a cup. Feels like it, I muttered. What if he hates it? What if he doesn't? I stared at the table again. This is the first thing I've built that wasn't just practice. If he laughs, I'm done. Claire stepped in front of me. You're not done even if he does. But I'll tell you this, he won't. How do you know? She gave me that calm, steady look of hers. Because you care too much to fail. The truck pulled in right on time. It was newer than Logan's sleeker black with chrome accents. Harrison stepped out, dressed in a tailored wool coat and dark jeans. Silver hair, clean lines, confidence in every movement. The kind of man who didn't just walk into rooms, he measured them. He offered his hand. Caleb, Mr. Wells, call me Harrison. He turned toward the barn and smiled faintly. This place looks exactly how she described it. Smells the same, too. We stepped inside. He paused at the doorway, breathing in deep. "I haven't been here in 15 years, he said. "She once made me a cabinet that took 8 months and 2 arguments to finish. Worth every second." He moved through the space slowly, reverently running his hand along benches, studying the layout, nodding at the neatness. Then he stopped in front of the walnut table. "This yours?" he asked. I nodded. "First commissioned style piece I've finished since ever." He didn't respond, just bent slightly and examined the joinery, ran a finger beneath the tabletop edge, tested the sturdiness with both hands. Silence. I tried not to squirm. Then he looked up. "It's good," he said. I exhaled. "Not Eleanor good," he continued, "but it has her honesty, her weight, and your own restraint. That's rare." My eyebrows lifted. "Restraint." He smiled. "Most new builders try to impress. You didn't over-design. You trusted the wood. That's a mark of someone who's paying attention." I stared at him, stunned. He straightened. "I'd like to commission 2 more pieces. 1 sideboard, 1 reading chair, if you're up for it." My voice caught. "You're serious? I wouldn't drive 3 hours to lie." I nodded slowly, stunned. Yeah, I'd be honored." He handed me a card. "Send me sketches when you're ready." Then softer. "She was proud of you, Caleb. She didn't say it often, but she always said you'd come back here someday. Said you had the hands for it. And the soul." The words landed harder than I expected. Harrison didn't linger. Just one last look at the table, one nod, and then he was gone. After he left, I sat in the middle of the barn floor, knees to chest, overwhelmed. Not because I'd been validated, but because I finally understood what this meant. I wasn't rebuilding her life. I was building mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept going back to that feeling in my chest, the one that told me I'd stepped onto a new path, not just inherited an old one. I pulled out Eleanor's final video file. I'd been saving it. The label said, "The Last Piece." I hit play. She appeared on screen, older, thinner hands trembling as she carved into a slab of maple. "I don't know if you'll ever watch this," she said. "But if you do, it means you stayed." Her smile flickered. "This last project, it's not a chair or a table or even something useful. It's a story, told in wood, carved across layers. It's called The Long Winter." She turned the piece so the camera could see. It was rough, unfinished, but beautiful. Rolling hills, trees stripped bare, a lone figure walking toward a distant barn. "Some winters last longer than others," she said. "Some last a whole life." She paused, eyes glistening. "But spring always comes. Eventually." I watched her for a long time after the video ended. Then I pulled out a fresh sheet of sketch paper and began drawing designs not for a sideboard or a commission, but for a sculpture. A piece inspired by Eleanor's unfinished one. Something about grief and forgiveness and home. Something that could be mine. The next day, I went into town and officially filed for a business license under the name Whitmore's & Sons, even if I was the only son. Yet. Claire helped me build a website that night. We sat on her porch, laptops balanced on our knees, chickens rustling nearby. "You've got 3 potential clients already," she said, scanning her inbox. "And I haven't even posted on local groups yet." I nodded, overwhelmed. She looked at me. "You're really doing it." I smiled. "Yeah, I guess I am." She bumped her shoulder against mine. "Told you you could." Later, I found another letter from Eleanor I hadn't noticed tucked into the back of a sketchbook, Caleb. You'll never get to ask me all the questions you deserve to ask. But I hope you'll learn that making is its own kind of answer. You'll never outrun the past, but you can shape what comes next. Keep building. Keep staying. You're stronger than the storms. E. I folded it and kept it in my wallet. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but what I was finally choosing to keep. The snowstorm came without much warning. Forecasts had mentioned light accumulation, but by morning the wind had picked up, and thick flakes were tumbling from the sky in angry spirals. I stood at the barn door watching the fields vanish under white, and thought not for the first time that nature didn't give a damn about our plans. Inside the workshop, the heat struggled to keep up. I layered on an extra sweatshirt and fired up the wood stove. My latest build, the commissioned sideboard for Harrison, was coming along, but the back panel was still loose, and I needed another day or two to fine-tune the drawers. But I couldn't focus. Something was shifting. In the weather, yes, but also in me. For the first time since I arrived, I felt more tethered to this place than afraid of it. And that scared me. I'd spent so many years drifting, assuming that permanence was just a prettier word for disappointment. But now I was building something stable, real, and not just with wood, with people, with purpose. I thought coming here was the end of something, but maybe it was the beginning. I called Claire around noon, storms rolling in harder than they thought I said. Tell me about it. I've got 2 goats mad at me for locking them in early. You okay over there? Yeah. But if you lose power, come down. I've got a generator and too much soup. I smiled. You always have soup, and you always sound surprised. I hesitated. Thanks, Claire. For soup, for everything. She paused. You're welcome, Caleb. By mid-afternoon, the roads were covered. I spent the next few hours sanding drawer faces and finishing a small custom jewelry box I'd been tinkering with on the side. Something delicate, feminine, probably a gift for someone I hadn't met yet. It was peaceful work, quiet, the kind that let your brain wander. I found myself thinking about my mom again. The more I settled into this life, the more I missed her, not as a memory, but as a person I wanted to know. I wanted to ask what she loved most about Eleanor before they fell apart. I wanted to ask if she'd ever felt at home in this town, if she'd had dreams outside of escaping. Mostly I just wanted to hear her voice. But grief is a funny thing. It doesn't always ache like a fresh wound. Sometimes it just hovers like breath in cold air. Always there. Always visible if you look in the right light. As night fell, the wind howled louder. Snow slammed sideways against the windows. I shut down the barn early, checked the fire twice, and made my way to the farmhouse. The storm was louder here, older, like the house itself remembered winters that tried to break it. I cooked eggs, made toast, and ate by the window, while watching trees bend like they were praying. I thought about calling Nancy and Ray, but I knew they were probably tucked in by now. Logan lived close too, but he wasn't much for chatting. So I did something I hadn't done in a while. I pulled out Eleanor's old carving from the long winter and studied it under the kitchen light. The piece had haunted me when I first found it, half-finished, crude in places, yet undeniably powerful. Now I was starting to understand it. It wasn't about loneliness. It was about endurance. I spent the next hour sketching ideas on tracing paper, building out her vision, but adding my own. More light in the sky. A second figure in the distance. A barn door slightly open. Not an ending. An invitation. Then the knock came. I froze. It was close to midnight, and no one in their right mind should have been on the road. Another knock, heavier. I opened the door cautiously. A man stood there bundled in an old parka, snow crusted on his boots and hood. His face was hidden in shadows. "You Caleb Whitmore?" he asked. My heart stuttered. "Who's asking?" He pulled back the hood. He looked like me, older, weathered. His eyes the same shape as mine. "My name's Evan," he said. "I think I might be your uncle." We stood there in silence for a beat that felt like a lifetime. I blinked. "What?" He shifted his weight. "I'm Lena's half-brother. Your grandmother's son. That's impossible," I said, stepping back. "Eleanor only had one kid." He looked past me into the kitchen, then back at me. "She didn't talk about me. That doesn't mean I don't exist." I didn't know what to say. The storm roared behind him like a challenge. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded once. "Yeah, come in." We sat at the kitchen table, 2 mugs of tea between us, steam rising like nervous breath. "I was born in '67, Evan began. "She was young, real young. Gave me up to a family in bar, closed adoption. I didn't know anything until I was 35 and got curious. Did you meet her once? In Boston. Brief, civil. But she wasn't ready. Said she had another daughter and that her life was complicated." He sipped his tea. "I didn't push. I figured she had her reasons. But after she died, I got curious again. Found her obituary. Found you." I leaned back in my chair, staring. "You waited until now to come. I wanted to be sure. Didn't want to cause more damage. And now she left a legacy. A workshop. A name. I guess I wanted to see if it meant anything to me." He pulled a small object from his coat pocket, a wooden toy car. Sanded smooth. Wheels carved by hand. She made this for me. Said it was the first thing she ever built for someone she gave away. I stared at the car throat tight. It looked like the ones I found in her box of prototypes. "I don't want anything from you," Evan said. "Or her estate. I just wanted to meet you and to say, I'm sorry for what you lost." The storm howled louder, but inside it was strangely still. "Thank you," I said softly. "You look like her," he added. "So do you." We sat in silence for a long time. 2 strangers. 2 stories tangled by blood and distance and choices neither of us made. When he left, we exchanged numbers. No promises. Just possibilities. After he was gone, I stood at the window watching his figure disappear into the snow. The storm was starting to break. The next morning, everything was quiet. Not just calm, but heavy, like the world had exhaled and left behind only stillness. The snow lay thick and untouched across the fields, softening every edge of the world. The storm had passed, but something in me hadn't yet settled. Evan's visit felt like a dream I couldn't quite shake. His face, his voice, that toy car in his hand, and the quiet apology stitched into everything he didn't say. I kept hearing his words. "I just wanted to meet you and say I'm sorry for what you lost." But I didn't know what to do with that. He hadn't asked for anything. No claim to land or legacy. Just a connection. A chance to be seen. And now that I'd seen him, I couldn't unsee the past that followed him in. I grabbed a shovel and stepped outside, clearing the walk, as sunlight caught the ice on the trees and turned them into glass. The cold bit at my skin, but it helped clear my head. The past doesn't vanish. It waits until you're strong enough to face it. Claire showed up around noon, armed with thermoses of coffee and a look that said she wasn't here just for small talk. "I heard from Ray," she said, as I waved her inside. "He said someone showed up at your door in the middle of the storm, yeah." She handed me a mug. "Want to tell me about it?" I sat at the table and ran a hand through my hair. "His name's Evan. Said he's my Uncle Eleanor's first kid. Gave up for adoption when she was young." Claire blinked. "She never told anyone." "Apparently not. Said they met once briefly. She gave him this little wooden car. Same style as the ones I found in her boxes." She sat across from me, quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you feel like I just got handed a whole chapter of a book I didn't know existed?" "Do you believe him?" "Yeah," I said. "I do." Claire nodded. "So now what? I don't know." I stood pacing. I feel like every time I think I've got my footing, something shakes loose. A fire. A letter. A brother. Now a damn blizzard brings me a blood relative I didn't know I had. I paused. And yet, I don't want to run. Claire looked at me, soft and sure. "That's how you know the roots are taking." Over the next few days, I threw myself back into work. Harrison's sideboard came together smoother than I expected. Every joint locked with a satisfying snap. The finish dried glossy and deep like polished riverstone. But it wasn't just about the wood anymore. Something inside me was realigning, clicking into place like the joints I'd struggled with just a month ago. I was learning that the truth didn't undo the past. It made room for the future, even the messy kind. Evan called that Friday. "I'm passing through bar again," he said. "If you're up for it, I'd like to take you to lunch." "No pressure." I paused. "Okay. Let's meet halfway." "Montpelier," he sounded surprised. "That works. We met at a diner off Main Street, one of those classic places with red vinyl booths and cracked menus." Evan looked tired but lighter, like the weight he carried had shifted even if it hadn't disappeared. Over burgers and fries, he told me more. About his adoptive parents, a factory job he held for 20 years, a divorce he never saw coming, and how he only recently started carving again simple things. Picture frames, spoon handles. "I think it's in our blood," he said with a crooked grin. "This need to make something with our hands." I nodded. I used to think I was just chasing her, trying to be what she wasn't. Now I'm starting to see I might actually want this life. He sipped his coffee. "You don't have to carry her ghost to honor her. That's the part I'm still figuring out." We didn't talk about inheritance or last names or who was owed what. Just life. And that was enough. Back at the farm, I started prepping for spring. Claire helped me order lumber for outdoor benches, a new line I wanted to try. Logan agreed to teach me more about weatherproofing and curing sealants. Even Nancy offered to connect me with a local artisan co-op. Momentum had found me, but so had clarity. I wasn't just a visitor here anymore. I was part of the ecosystem, growing, shifting, steadying. And I knew deep down it was time to finish Eleanor's final piece. The long winter still sat on its easel in the barn untouched since the night I'd watched her video. Now I picked up my chisels and gently, deliberately began carving again. I added the second figure I'd sketched, a child, beside the original lone walker, their hand tucked into the older one's. I carved in a small trail of footprints behind them, winding toward the open barn door in the distance. Then I etched a sun. Low, faint, but rising. It took 2 days. When I stepped back, the story felt complete. Not happy, but honest. The kind of ending that doesn't close a book, but opens the next one. I invited everyone to the barn that Sunday. Claire, Logan, Nancy, and Ray. Even Evan, who arrived quietly and stood near the back with a thermos and cautious eyes. I unveiled the long winter with no speech, just the peace. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Claire whispered, "It's beautiful." Nancy touched her chest. "That's her. But also you." Even Logan gave a grunt of respect. "You did right by her." Evan stepped closer, hands in his coat pockets. "She would have wanted this scene." I nodded, throat tight. "Do you think she ever wanted us to finish it?" I asked. "No," Evan said softly. "I think she wanted you to finish it." That night, I hung the sculpture in the farmhouse right above the mantel where my mother's sketch still lived. Eleanor and Lena, wood and charcoal, past and future, side by side. Later, as the fire crackled and night deepened outside, Claire leaned into me on the couch. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. For once, I think I really am." What happens next? I looked around the room, the life being built slowly, surely. "I think I keep going," I said. "Keep building, keep staying." She smiled. "Sounds like a beginning." And I realized it was. Not because the pain was gone, but because I could carry it now. It was early spring when I decided to open the barn to the public. Not for sales, not even for business. For community. Claire said I should call it an open studio, but that felt too polished. What I wanted was messier, warmer. I wanted people to walk in and see the shavings on the floor, the gouged-up benches, the half-finished pieces. I wanted them to feel the heartbeat of the place, Eleanor's heartbeat, now pulsing through my hands. We set the date for a Saturday in April. Flyers went up at the farmer's market and hardware store. Claire posted it online, and Logan told me gruffly that he'd mention it to a guy. I didn't expect much. A few curious neighbors. Maybe someone from town who remembered Eleanor. But by noon, the barn was full. Kids with sticky fingers running circles around table legs. Older couples tracing their hands across the wood grain. Artists talking varnish. Locals sharing stories about pieces Eleanor had built for them decades ago. One man even brought in a stool she'd made in the 70s, cracked and worn, but still sturdy. She said it was imperfect, he told me. I said, "So am I. Guess that's why I've kept it all this time." I smiled, heart swelling. Sounds like something she'd say. The day went on like that. Laughter, sawdust stories. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing what stays with you. That afternoon, as the crowd thinned out, Claire found me by the workbench. "You see what you've built here?" she asked. "Mostly a mess," I joked. She shook her head. "No, Caleb. A gathering. A space that holds people. That matters." I looked around at the conversations still happening in the corners, the quiet awe in someone's eyes as they studied the long winter, and I felt it too. This place was no longer just about inheritance. It was about presence. I'd spent so long thinking I had to earn it, prove myself worthy. But what if all I had to do was stay that evening after the last visitor left, and the barn fell quiet? I swept the floor slowly, savoring the rhythm. The door creaked behind me. Evan stood there holding something wrapped in a faded blue towel. "Brought you something," he said. I gestured him inside. He unwrapped the towel carefully and revealed a small, hand-carved figure, a child holding a lantern arm outstretched. "I made it years ago," he said. "Didn't know why at the time. Thought maybe I was making the boy I never got to be." He placed it on the table beside the long winter. "It belongs here," he said. The figure fit perfectly, like it had always been waiting to join the scene. "I've been thinking," he continued, "about doing more carving. Taking a real shot at it. You think there's room in this place for two Whitmores?" I looked at him, this man who was part of my story, even if our pages hadn't always lined up. "Yeah," I said. "I think there is." Later that week, I drove out to Bar with Claire. We met with a lawyer, went over the details. Evan didn't want ownership of the farm, but we set up a partnership clause, a way to collaborate, to share without dividing. It wasn't about the land. It was about the legacy. One evening, while sorting through old plans, I found a folder labeled Future Festival Booth. Inside were sketches Eleanor had made for a mobile workshop, tables that folded, displays that packed down, a rolling setup for showing her work at art festivals across New England. She'd never built it, but I could. With Claire's help, I drafted an updated version. Evan offered to help with carving details. Logan lent me trailer parts from his shed. Nancy brought over apple pies as payment for the promise of a booth at the county fair. It came together piece by piece. And one afternoon in late May, Claire looked at me from the passenger seat of my truck as we hauled the trailer into town and said, "You know this isn't just a booth, right?" I smiled. "Yeah, it's a beginning." At the festival, people wandered in and out of the booth all day. Some bought pieces, some just ran their fingers along the wood and whispered memories about Eleanor. A woman cried when she saw the long winter, then hugged me without asking. I didn't mind. Near the end of the day, a teenage boy lingered by the back table where I'd set up a few tools for kids to try. "You build all this?" he asked. I nodded. "I want to do this someday," he said quietly. I handed him a scrap of walnut. "Then start with this." His eyes lit up, and just like that I understood something new. Sometimes we build with wood. Sometimes we build with moments. But both can last. When the sun set over the fairgrounds, painting everything gold and orange, I stood beside the booth and let myself breathe. Claire reached for my hand. "I never asked," she said, "but do you think you'll stay?" I turned to her. "I think I already did." And I meant it. Every nail, every knot, every scar in the wood told a piece of my story now. Not a story of loss, but of belonging. Later that night, back at the farmhouse, I sat by the fire, journal in hand. I wrote one sentence: "The barn is full of ghosts, but now they feel like family." Outside, the stars stretched over Vermont like old memories learning how to shine again. And inside, the future waited, unfinished, imperfect, and entirely mine. The summer mornings on the farm had their own kind of rhythm. Birds before the sun, coffee before the tools, sweat before success. I'd wake up to the sound of wind brushing through the trees, light streaming across the kitchen floor, and the quiet creak of this old house settling into itself like it had finally exhaled. I'd open the windows, let the breeze roll in, and just sit there for a moment holding the stillness. Everything had changed, and everything had stayed the same. The barn still smelled like sawdust and oil. The coffee still brewed too strong. The road into town still dipped the same way near the orchard. But inside me, something had shifted, like a beam had finally locked into place after years of leaning. I wasn't patching holes anymore. I was framing new walls. That morning I was working on a cradle, commissioned by a couple from town expecting their first baby. Simple design, clean lines, nothing fancy. But it mattered. Every groove I carved into the oak felt like part of a prayer. May this hold more than a child. May it hold the start of something good. As I worked, I thought about Eleanor. I thought about how much she gave and how much she withheld. about the love she didn't know how to show, and the legacy she left behind anyway. And I thought about what she'd say now if she could see the barn full of life. The booth built, the business steady, her grandson standing where she once stood, hands calloused, heart open. Maybe she wouldn't say much at all. Maybe she'd just nod and go back to carving. That sounded like her. Claire arrived around noon with lemonade and a stack of new orders. She leaned against the frame of the barn, watching me shape the cradle rails with a soft smile on her face. "You know," she said, "this is the calmest I've ever seen you." I looked up. "You mean I'm usually a disaster?" She laughed. "No, but when you first came here, everything in you was clenched, like you were bracing for something to collapse." "Wasn't wrong," I said. "A lot did." And now I set the chisel down, wiped my hands on a rag. Now I think I know how to rebuild. Claire walked over and kissed me, slow and certain. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. And I believed her. That used to be hard. Later that day, Evan showed up to help move lumber. His shoulders had filled out again. His eyes didn't carry the same shadow. He'd been spending more time in town, connecting with people who remembered his mother in fragments. He said it helped piece her back together. We didn't talk much while we worked. We didn't have to. After we stacked the last boards, he pulled out a new carving from his truck, 2 figures holding hands beneath a tree. It was rough, but heartfelt. "Been thinking about building a line of these," he said. "Something about reconnection." I turned the carving in my hands, nodded. "You're onto something." He looked at me. "You ever think about teaching? Not just building, but showing others how?" The thought surprised me. Maybe I said, "Down the line, you'd be good at it." I smiled. "We'll see." But the idea lingered. That night I stood alone in the barn lights, off the moon spilling through the windows like silver ink. I walked from bench to bench, hand trailing over wood shavings, tool handles, finished pieces waiting for pickup. I thought about the boy who showed up on this farm, angry and lost. The one who believed running was the only way to stay safe. And I thought about the man who now called this place home, who welcomed strangers, made peace with ghosts, built something out of what was left. That was the miracle, wasn't it? Not that the past could be undone, but that we could make something beautiful in spite of it. Or maybe because of it. I paused in front of the long winter the sculpture Eleanor started, and I finished. I'd mounted the little lantern boy Evan carved at its base. It looked complete now. More than that, true. The next morning, I wrote a letter. To no one in particular. Or maybe to myself. "Dear Caleb, you didn't fix everything. You never could. But you stayed. You built. You let people in. And maybe that's the only legacy that really matters. Not perfection, not apology, but presence. You chose to stay when it would have been easier to run. You chose roots over escape. You chose love even when you didn't know what to do with it. And now look what you've grown. Keep going. Keep staying. That's enough. Love, Caleb." I folded the letter, tucked it in the drawer beneath my workbench. Not for anyone else, just to remind me. Weeks passed. Spring melted into summer. The cradle was delivered, followed by a flood of thank you cards and photos. More orders came in. A school asked me to speak to their shop class. A woman in New Hampshire requested a piece inspired by Eleanor's work, and I finally felt ready to say yes, not because I wanted to replicate her, but because I'd found my voice. Claire moved in quietly, like she'd always belonged here. Evan started his own carving series, setting up shop in the empty side of the barn. We shared the space, the tools, the silence, and we were okay. more than okay. We were building something. Sometimes at night I'd stand at the edge of the field and look up at the farmhouse lights, the barn aglow behind me, the stars brushing against the black. And I'd think I came here to uncover the past, but what I found was the future. This wasn't a story about wood. It was a story about forgiveness, about staying, about the courage it takes to live in the house you were once afraid to enter, and the quiet, steady grace of learning that sometimes the life you're meant for is the one you build with your own hands. Not perfect, but true. And if someone were to ask me now what this place means, I'd say this: it's where the winter ended and the home began.